Will Smith. We haven't spoken about him for a hot minute. It's been a while since we've spoken about Will Smith. I thought there was look, there's a lot of actors that are speaking out right now about this SAG-AFTRA. I wanted to get that right. SAG-AFTRA. It's the Screen Actors Guild and the actor film. That one. The movie people, Hollywood, are on strike. The writers are on strike. Everything is first time in like 60 years that both the actors and the writers have struck together, and there's a lot going on. And so I thought that this would be a good point to be able to talk about how we negotiate as leaders, because at the moment there's obviously really poor negotiation going on because everyone's on strike. So it's obviously gotten to a point where communication beforehand, negotiations beforehand didn't go well, and now they've just struck. Before getting into kind of like the story and everything like that, Dr. Rod, what's your take on strikes and strike action?
Well, I would never say a strike is never justified, but generally strikes are to be avoided, in part because third parties are affected. And in other words, there's collateral damage. And I think as Christians, we should do the very best we can to avoid that. The other thing, of course, is I'm hugely biased because I believe God is my provider, not my employer, and that God is the one who's going to ensure that I prosper in a financial sense. So I'm generally against striking, but I do think that people should have the legal freedom to strike, certainly under some conditions. And I think, what we're seeing in Hollywood at the moment, I think it's the culmination of a long period where the way in which actors and writers are remunerated is no longer really appropriate given the way in which technologies have developed.
Yep.
Now, personally, I don't care if they're on strike because most of my entertainment comes from podcasts, and people like us are doing podcasts anyway.
We're still working.
So there's plenty happening. But some of the issues that are being raised by the actors, I think, and the writers are reflective of the fact technology has changed, and they see that their work is being used, but they're not being remunerated. That's one of their issues because I don't know what the situation is like in every country, but with digital television broadcasting here in Australia, we've now got access to a lot more channels, but there's only a few television companies, but we have a lot of channels. And so we're seeing repeat after repeat of very old movies and series and so on. Lots of people are watching, but the actors and writers are not being recompensed for that. So I think that's something that's worth negotiating.
Yeah.
On the other hand, one of the other issues is that Hollywood is producing garbage. And so there's not enough people
Tell us what
watching.
you really think, Dr. Rod.
Frankly, the worldview held by many in Hollywood is just plain not shared by people who live real lives in the real world and face real problems. So, there's an issue here too of the unreality of the Hollywood world, which people are just not accepting anymore because they're not going to the movies.
Yeah, and also I kind of feel like, look, I think that there's two sides to every story, right? And I think there's two sides to this. One side is on the executive side of streamers, because that's kind of the main sticking point.
That's
the streaming
the big
contracts,
issue. Of course, that's right, yeah.
But streaming companies don't make money. They're not profitable. And so how are they meant to... The challenge is how do they manage royalties and things like that when they're not profitable, and their model isn't like TV. If there was 1,000 viewers, you knew you had $100 of advertising for that 1,000 viewers or whatever. Like it's quite easy to do that. But with streaming, it's not like that, because just because you've got all those viewers, I pay a Netflix subscription of $10 a month or whatever it works out to be, in Australian. But, like, how do they know how many I'm watching, and do they then divide that $10 up amongst what I watch? And, there's all these complexities. And like I said, most of these streaming companies, actually all of them, are running at a loss. They're all running at a loss. They're only making money because of the share prices, and that's it. And that kind of brings me to one side of this conversation about communication. Is I've heard reports of the reason, one of the challenges is streaming companies don't release viewing numbers, because TV, they had to, because they say we've got 1 million viewers so that they could sell advertising. They have to say how many viewers they have. But streamers are kind of keeping that close to their chest, because that if they release that, they're afraid that that's going to affect share prices, because that's just another metric now that's probably not as good as it should be or whatever. So they're not communicating the full story, the streamers, and therefore the actors are making assumptions that, well, you're making all this money and getting all these views, when maybe they're not, right? And so I think that that's one point of contention here, is the fact that because they're not communicating, that's one thing that causes challenges, in leadership, is when you're actually not communicating. I mean, we see it all the time when in businesses. The boss, he might be stressed, he might just be closed off, he might be jaded, he might just be busy, he might just be whatever. And the boss, he or she, may not actually communicate things properly, and they may just come in and just grunt, grunt tasks and directions to people and just keep going and not actually share the full information. And it just, when we don't communicate the full story, it leaves gaps for people to be able to fill in the story with their own story. How do we, because there's a balancing act, right? Because we don't necessarily need to overshare. We obviously, Netflix and stuff, they need to protect their share prices. They need to, they need to protect themselves, because at the moment they're just on this production binge of just producing non-stop, and they're pumping money into it because they just need to, because they need to catch up with Disney and HBO and all those other streamers that just have a back catalogue of and so how do we make sure we communicate enough to people so that they're on board, but not too much that we still need to protect ourselves in our business?
Well, there's been a lot written about this. There's a lot of theory in economics about the whole of the bargaining process.
Mm-hmm.
And often either side doesn't really want to reveal everything because it's not in their interests. But of course, look, if the streaming services are not making money, the economist in me says, go out of business.
Yeah.
And, I think there is something of a moral case to be said for the actors and writers receiving some kind of recompense when their material is being published in this way. And in many cases, of course, at the time that the film or the series was made, nobody had any idea that technology would develop in the way it has.
Yeah.
So I think there's something of an ethical argument on the side of the actors and the writers.
Yeah.
If the streaming companies are saying, look, we can't make money out of this, go out of business. Just go out of business. This whole bargaining area is really difficult because you often don't want to reveal your whole hand because you don't want to be taken advantage of. And there's a lot of very sophisticated theory to sort of explain all this kind of thing. And there are lots of experiments done in economics too in these kinds of areas. You get situations in which there's an unequal distribution of power and all kinds of things. So the studios, for example, are more powerful than individual actors. That's one reason why they join a guild or a union. Look, I'm happy to let this play out. Good leaders are going to look to the long term. I think what is best for the industry, so for the actors, the writers, and also the companies into the long term, not just the short term. But beyond that, there's not really a lot I can say beyond the fact, let the market sort it out. Let the market. So what signals is the market giving? Is the market giving the signal that, well, actually, we need to be producing something of better quality? Is the market saying, look, we don't really value the services of the streaming companies, in which case just go out of business. It's not something that really is contributing positively to human flourishing. So I don't know that there's much more I can add.
No, and so the other side that I think that is worthwhile talking about is sometimes in a negotiation, we can be fighting. What's the right term for it? I don't necessarily want to say fighting a losing battle, but all these actors are trying to look back of like, well, we got this many royalties from our previous stuff, and this is what we've been getting up until now, so we should earn that moving forward. It's like, well, no, the climate has changed. Things change, industries change. The whole part of this conversation is AI and how it's going to be taking over some things. Like, yes, you just can't be paid the same amount that you used to. And I think that with what you were saying is like the quality has dropped 100%. I think that the quality has dropped, but I also feel like we as a society have become so hungry for content that I think that there's this supply and demand of, we as a society consume so much content nowadays, but now also the barrier of entry to get into creating content. I mean, look at us. We've got $60 a month, subscription to a video thing, and I mean, look, okay, I've got some expensive equipment here, but I don't need to. I mean, what we're doing right now 10 years ago would have cost $1 million to set up a studio, and we can do it for a couple of $100, right? And so the barrier of entry is much lower. And so what I kind of see the future of especially content is there's going to be a lot more people producing lower quality content, and that's just the way it is. It's like, rather than it being, actually, I think that there'll be a Marvel movie, Fast and the Furious, and Barbie that's doing amazing at the moment. That might be a topic for another day that we might talk about. But like, you got the big name franchises that are doing these big blockbusters, and they're nothing, right? Like, so I kind of feel like we're going to get to the place, because everyone's craving so much content, everyone's having to pump out so much cheap, lower quality. Not that it's bad information and poor quality in the information, but it's just not the production value, because we do this live, my team will cut it up and it'll be out in the next couple of days, and then that's it. Whereas a movie takes years to produce. And so I think that there's now the barrier of entry is low, everyone's consuming content. I think that it's going to allow more people to make money from, let's call it entertainment, but we're not going to have the big, massive payouts that we used to see in Hollywood. Obviously, for the big people like The Rock and Matt Damon and like all those people, obviously there'll be a select few that'll still make the big tens of millions and stuff like that. But I think that it's just going to be available for more people to kind of follow their dreams, follow their purpose of being an actor or an actress or whatever, and maybe make a decent living of $50,000 to $100,000 a year on it, rather than making millions. And I think that when this is kind of a long way around to ask this question, is all these people fighting for what used to be, but the climate's changed, where now I think that they can shoot themselves in the foot by asking for too much. So how how do we find that balance of fighting for what's right, but also accepting that, things have changed?
Well, look, ultimately, no matter what you think about markets, markets do sort things out. So if at the end of the day there's an agreement which results in the actors and writers in some sense being paid too much, there'll simply be fewer opportunities. And so it'll be more and more difficult to break into the market as an actor or as a writer, or maybe people will do as you suggest and they'll just fall back on what they can do with whatever resources they have, and maybe they will be able to generate a reasonably decent income from that. Look, we've seen technological shifts before. Remember that song? Was it Video Killed the Radio Star?
Yes.
Video didn't kill the radio star.
No.
We still have radio. Radio is still quite popular. I mean, now everybody wants a DAB plus radio in their motor vehicle.
A what? A what?
Digital radio.
Okay. I'm like,
DAB plus.
Okay, I don't even know.
Look,
what
man,
that was.
you follow racing cars. I follow every man's car. Okay. I watch probably 20 or 30 car reviews every week, usually while I'm sitting down having lunch or something like that. And I'm always interested to know if you've got a DAB plus radio receiver in the car, because many do, some don't. So we still have radio. We still have free-to-air television. Not that I watch it, but it's still there. We've got cable TV. But the whole landscape is changing. And ultimately, it doesn't matter much how much interference in the market comes from, unions or from governments or whatever. Ultimately, the market sorts things out. And I happen to believe that free markets, most of the time, but not always, most of the time actually generate just outcomes. It would actually take me a long time to explain that, but when I'm teaching first-year students in university economics, at least in the Christian context, I go through how a competitive economy leads to a just price or just wage and just prices and so on. The reason being that a competitive market actually leaves businesses with no what we call excess profit. So they're making enough to pay all of their costs and to make a return on the risk that they take and their own input to their own finance and time and energy and entrepreneurial spirit and so on. And that seems to me to be a just outcome. So no matter what they do, ultimately, market forces end up ruling the roost. And I think that's part of God's design, actually, although I know that's not a popular view. I do think it's part of God's design.
So let me ask you about that, because I think it's beautiful, because I agree that markets will sort themselves out. So looking at ourselves as business leaders, Christian business leaders that are wanting to lead ethically and with integrity, do you suggest that markets will sort themselves out? So if you position yourself at fair market, then you will be the last man standing, so to speak, or that'll be better? Or is it best to kind of capitalize on opportunities and as the market works its way back down?
Well, look, generally, we're talking about something like this particular strike. It's a collective action. So it's a kind of there's a social process going on here. But look, we're getting into an area which is very, very complex, and maybe we should spend a whole podcast talking about this. But the markets don't always work perfectly when people haven't got, if you like, right motivation, because we have to have an attitude that says we care about the people at the bottom of the heap. We care about the poor. We must care about actors who fall upon hard times, for example, through illness or through accident or simply through old age. Market processes themselves don't have any ethical values. It's people acting in markets that have the ethical values. So it can never be the market on its own. It's got to be the market plus what amounts to our worldview. And biblically speaking, I believe, and I think it's relatively easy to demonstrate, that the Bible does support an approach in which there's freedom for people to choose things like their wages and conditions. There's freedom to bargain over those things, but there must always be concern for what the Bible calls the poor, the orphans, the widows, the people who find, and there's lots and lots of Old Testament law that's all about protecting those who really, through no fault of their own, end up at the bottom of the heap.
Yeah.
God instituted laws concerning divorce even in the Old Testament, because back in that time it was the divorced woman who was at the bottom of the heap.
Yeah.
So God devised a system to protect them, and I think what we tend to forget when we talk about the market is that the market itself has no values. It's only the people within the market actors who have the values. And the Bible very strongly points to the need for us always to be caring for those who are at the bottom of the heap. So there's nothing wrong with us making a lot of money, nothing wrong with us being highly profitable in business or being a highly paid actor or sports star. But biblically speaking, it's not just for ourselves. It is never only about the individual. It is also about community.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that about caring about the little person or whatever the needy is. I heard a stat, and I can't remember what exact number it was, but there's actually a very, very, very small percentage of actors that are like small percentage of members of the SAG-AFTRA thing that actually earn enough to earn a full-time wage, like a very small percentage of them. And then obviously there's a much smaller percentage of them that are making the 10, 20, $30 million a movie or a year or that kind of thing. I think that, like, you're right, because to go back to my point that I was sharing is, are they asking for too much? It makes it pretty hard when an actor is used to earning $30 million a year, or $30 million from a movie, and then they know that they're going to make, or they make $20 million for the movie, and they know they're going to make $10 million on royalties and stuff like that. So the challenge is it's all well and good to demand $30 million if you're making the studio $500 million or $100 million or whatever. Like that's fair, right? Like, fine, if you're the big name, if you're the draw, if you're the reason why people are turning up, be paid your thing. But if you're expecting to be paid $30 million because you've always earned $30 million, I think that's where, I'm using a big figure, but it can be, if you're used to, if you're trying to earn $100,000 a year, but the money just isn't there in movies anymore. People aren't going to the cinema like they used to. People aren't, like, there's not the advertising money in movies and in TV and everything like that, right? So I just kind of feel like, obviously, I think both sides are at fault and both sides are trying to make their own, trying to protect their own interests, and that's fine. Like, it's business. That's what you got to do. Like, and if you're an actor, if you don't feel like that contract is right for you, don't sign it, right? Like, but I think that if you get caught up in wanting what you've always gotten, you're going to get a rude awakening. I kind of feel like you're going to get a surprise because the money just isn't there, might not be there anymore, just because of the way things have changed. But interesting to take on that. And is there anything else you want to share before we move on? Because I don't feel like we've really summed up, but there was a lot of little things that we spoke about along the way.
It's very complex, of course. But I think you've summed it up fairly well. And I guess the only other point I want to reiterate is that, listen, guys, if you're a Christian, any Christian, let alone Christian in leadership, you just got to understand God is our provider.
Mm.
And who are we going to trust? The studio? Or are we going to trust God?
Mm. And God is the provider, not us. So as we're leading our people, we're responsible for them, but we shouldn't take on that role of God to be, I'm providing for these people. So no, you're not. Like, God's providing through you. So yes, very good point, Dr. Rob.
The only other thing I would add as a practical thing, if you get paid $30 million for a movie, don't live a $30 million a year lifestyle.
Oh, 100%. Yes. Yes.
Man, you you need to apply a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
And I could speak a long time about this because I've talked with a lot of people over the years about this kind of thing. It's very difficult in industries where income fluctuates a lot. You tend to live at the level of your highest income, but that's not wise in the long term.
That's actually a really good point, especially for business leaders, because business fluctuates from month to month, and it can
Absolutely.
And it's very easy as a business owner to go, we are like, I earned this much this month, so that average that out over the year, we make this much a year, but you don't, like, not always. No. So yeah, there's some true, incredible wisdom. You guys heard it here, right? Like, that's why I have this guy with me. He has so much wisdom for me, and yeah, I'm just sharing him with you guys. I hope you appreciate that. Thank you, Dr. Rob, for your wisdom. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube with Leadership podcast. If you've liked that, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any thoughts of how it challenged or helped your leadership, put a comment below, and we'd be honored if you would consider subscribing for more leadership content. Also, make sure you check out the playlist for more episodes like this.